Good evening. I want to welcome all of you to the joint commission hearing that we're having tonight, where it relates to things that we might be able to do to increase voter turnout. I'm sure if you're here, it definitely sends a message to me that you care. And again, I appreciate that. But we're in a crisis mode where it relates to turnout. So we figured one of the best ways to go about improving this was just to have candid conversations with you, get your thoughts. We've had a series of experts that have appeared at various hearings that we've had. Tonight we have leaders in the business community. We can get a feel for what they think about it. We have individuals from the labor community, and I hope for us to just to have a real free-flowing conversation. I want to really thank all of the organizations that helped us put on this event tonight. But I really want to thank the Van Nuys Neighborhood Council for all of their hard work, and I have invited them to sit along the horseshoe with us, and I'm sure we'll hear from them a little later. I'm joined with my colleague and dear friend, Jose Huizar, the chair of the Plum Committee for the City of Los Angeles, and we're also joined by the president of the Ethics Commission, Mr. Nathan Hockman, who's a good man, and I appreciate you adjusting your calendar to be with us. So if I could ask Mr. Rusty Hicks and Reuben to come up, and Andrew? Okay, so what we'll do, we have one more panelist that will join us today. And so we hope that she'll arrive as soon as she can get here. We want to start off with these two gentlemen that I have today. We have Rusty, who's a labor activist in tune with their thoughts. Then we have Reuben, a high-ranking member of the Los Angeles Chamber, individuals who understand politics, and we're going to start out with opening statements from both of you. Take 10 minutes, 8 minutes, whatever, and we're going to make this kind of free and easy. I'll be calling up members of the public kind of intermittently throughout this process. So before you guys start, I do want to start out with Howard, and we'll start out with you and let you kick it off, representing the Van Nuys Neighborhood Council, and then I'm looking for Jason Ackerman, and then we'll go to Sarah Mitchell. So we'll start out with you, Howard. Is his mic hot? Okay, your mic is hot.
Okay, excellent. All right. Councilman Wesson, Councilman Huizar, and esteemed guests, I'm Howard Benjamin, the Vice President of the Van Nuys Neighborhood Council. To paraphrase an old quote, if the electorate won't go to the polls, then the polls must come to the electorate. The Los Angeles City Council created an app to allow residents access to available city services. This app or application works and already connects citizens of Los Angeles with the departments that can respond to those requests. Pothole repairs, trash collection, and graffiti removal are just a few of the problems this app helps to solve. Every cell phone, every tablet, laptop computer, and desktop computer device has a digital signature. It would seem that a citywide voting could also be achieved through this app as well. by registering the digital signature of the registrant's choice of device, along with the last 4 digits of their Social Security number as a PIN number, during the voter registration process, it would be very easy to allow one to vote using an established app with very minor modifications. Voter apathy has risen to new heights, and the vast majority of registered voters are foregoing the privilege because it is inconvenient to find time in today's busy and hectic lifestyle. By creating an online portal to vote, you're eliminating the middleman of voting places and voting by mail as an alternative. I'm not suggesting that we eliminate the existing voting methods, but why not augment them with 21st century technology? The methodology would work for municipalities, county organizations, state and national elections if a similar app could be developed by those governmental bodies. Simplicity is the key to success, and this is the simplest solution I can think of to increase participation from the county's voting population. The technology already exists. Let's utilize it and experience the results that we can achieve by adding a new digital portal to the process.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I should say that our timer is not working. So I'm going to give everybody a couple of minutes. It'll be a little loose. I want you to don't feel rushed. And let's just try to make this fair for everyone that's here. So I called Mr. Ackerman. Jason. Oh, Jason, come on up. And you'll be followed by Sarah Mitchell, and then we'll go to our folk on the panel. Welcome. Good to see you again.
Welcome. Good to see you again here in wonderful Van Nuys City Hall. Since I don't have the 2-minute clock, I'm going to take a second to breathe and collect my thoughts for a second.
Go right ahead.
All right. So first off, I think that what Howard was proposing to have app voting with unique ID is brilliant. I think that's definitely a worthwhile proposal. I think that we should avoid tying our city and state elections to the even year cycle that the federal government operates on. It's just too many candidates to remember, too many initiatives to think of, and just also creates all sorts of complications for any of these reforms we want to pursue. I think that we should take a page of the neighborhood council's playbook and move our elections to the weekends, and ideally Sunday, which I know seems counterintuitive, but as a former student of theology and anthropology, I can tell you that if you're an Orthodox Jew, you can't vote on Saturday, but if you're a Christian, there's no reason why you can't vote on Sunday. So keep in mind some religious sensitivity when we're deciding the new date if we decide to pursue the weekend option. If we decide to stick with the weekend option, I would highly encourage some kind of incentive to offer paid days off or time off for workers. So that way they don't have to choose between participating in the civic process and making a living and feeding their families. So on a different note, I wish that there had been more substantial outreach to the neighborhood councils earlier on in the process rather than just going through a daily news article, so that we could actually prepare and have intelligent discussion on the subject. I know some have managed to get this together. Our neighborhood council meets at the end of the month, and it makes it very difficult to get anything out in a timely process if you want our official position on something. And that was kind of the official position of the council, is that if you wanted our official position, you should have reached us as neighborhood councils.
Okay, now just so you know, and your time's just about expired, Jason, I did send a letter, Andrew, how long ago, asking for responses June of this year. We sent it to Dunn, and Dunn sent out a letter. I agree with you, My goal is to connect even more with our neighborhood councils. I respect you. I appreciate the hard work that all of you do, and you get little to no praise. And so I would hope that we would have, if I could have a relationship with you like I have with my own neighborhood councils, trust me, it's a great relationship. So Jason, I thank you. And we're going to go to Miss Mitchell now. Sarah?
Thank you very much, Mr.
Sarah, no, thank you, Jason. Sarah Mitchell. I saw you talking to Reuben. Okay.
Just listen to me, all right?
I
Give me a
will.
chance.
Okay. Welcome.
Good evening, council members and commissioner. I'm Sarah Mitchell. I'm with the Valley Industry and Commerce Association. We represent more than 400 businesses in the city and surrounding areas. VICA does not have an official position on all of the recommendations that are in discussion. The commissioner will actually be joining us in our November meeting at our Government Affairs Committee to talk more in depth about a few of them. But what VICA has long advocated for is consolidating city and county elections. Our members have told us, and they've been very clear, that they are suffering a case of voter fatigue, and they are even some of the most active voters, but they're getting sick of it. In 2013 alone, many of us voted in a March local primary, a May local general election, September special primary, and a November special general election. All of this was after a competitive and full election in 2012, which had dozens of competitive races and controversial ballot measures. And while 69% of Angelenos voted in the 2012 general election, in 2013, we only had 23% of registered voters come. People choose not to vote for many reasons, but we can expect that we'll see an increase in voter turnout if they do not need to constantly interrupt their personal and professional commitments to head to the polls. Our local elected officials make a lot of decisions regarding the city's business climate and quality of life. It is in our best interest to make it as easy as possible for our residents to cast their votes for these influential positions. Furthermore, the consolidations of elections will save the city millions of dollars that could be better spent on serving the residents and creating a quality of life attractive to more businesses and their employees. We urge our elected officials to approve this common sense proposal as soon as possible. Thank you.
Thank you for coming out, and we really appreciate it. Now, before I go back to the community, I think I'd like to start off with our panel. And Ms. Gold, if you could maybe start it off, like I mentioned to the other gentlemen that are here, go, 8, 10, 11 minutes just to kind of give a spiel. If you have any data, statistics, we would love to hear that. After you, we'll go to the other two gentlemen. Then we'll take some more public comment cards. We will have questions for you, and we hope to have, like I said, a real back and forth conversation. So I appreciate you coming, really appreciate all of you. So with that said, the floor is yours.
Great. Good evening. Council President Wesson, other members of the Rules and Elections Committee, and commissions from the LA City Ethics Commission, and our other invited guests. I first of all want to thank you all for inviting me to be part of this discussion. It's a very critical discussion because it really is about the future of our city and the strength of the democracy and the ability of every person in Los Angeles who is eligible to have their voices heard in directing the future of the city. I'm Rosalind Gold. I'm Senior Director of Policy Research and Advocacy for the National Association of Latino Elected and Appointed Officials. That's the NALEO Educational Fund. And I also served as one of the commissioners for the City of Los Angeles Municipal Election Reform Commission. And when I talk with you this evening, I am going to be talking both from my experience of doing voter engagement with Latinos and other underrepresented groups, as well as what we learned from the commission. Now, the commission is not in existence anymore, so I'm not speaking on behalf of the commission, but the things that I have to say will be very much informed by what I learned as a commissioner, as well as our experience with working with underrepresented groups in the city. So first of all, just a little bit about the problem and the challenge. I'm sure you've probably seen and heard the statistics. We have seen, since the late 60s at least, a decline in voter turnout in city elections in Los Angeles. And you go all the way back to 1969. The turnout in the primary was about 66% of registered voters. That's like 2/3, 2 out of 3 registered voters. By 1985, that had declined to about 35%, essentially 1 out of 3 of registered voters. And again, in this primary turnout, in the 2 most recent primaries, 2009 and 2013, we were about 18% in 2009 and about 21% in the primary in 2013. We had a little jump off in the 2013 primary to 23%, but again, you can see there's just a very large decline in the number of people who are showing up to cast ballots in terms of those who are actually registered to vote. And when we took a step back and talked to experts and looked at the data that's out there and the research, the reasons people don't vote kind of very roughly fall into sort of 3 different constellations. Kind of generalizing here, but I think this is a good way to think about it. So first constellation of issues is, how do people feel about politics and the effectiveness of their participation? Do they trust government? Do they trust elected officials? Do they think their vote will make a difference? Do they think that voting will in any way change their life? And we tend to see with people who don't participate and don't vote a feeling that, no, it's not going to make a difference. I don't trust the system. They may be very knowledgeable about politics, and so it's not like they're apathetic, but they just don't see voting as the way to get to where they need to go in terms of making changes. The next constellation is what we would call informational barriers. People may need information about how to register to vote. They may want information about the issues or the candidates. They may lack information about something as basic as, where is my precinct? Where is my polling site? I mean, we operate a hotline for that we have bilingual operators, and most of our phone calls to our hotline are those kinds of simple questions. Where's my, what hours are polls open? Who should I vote for? Which we don't answer, but again, people really just want to know more about issues, more about candidates, more about the electoral process. The third constellation of issues are what I would sort of call some of the structural barriers. Things like people perceiving that they don't have enough time, people feeling that places to vote aren't accessible to them, or the locations aren't places they can get to, people not feeling like the times of the day or the days of the week that they need to vote or want to vote are good for them in terms of their work responsibilities and their family responsibilities. And these kinds of reasons are very much borne out in research that the Census Bureau has done every 2 years. They ask people, why don't you vote? 1 out of 5 people say, I don't have enough time. Now, sometimes that's another way of saying I'm not interested enough, but we also have maybe another 10 to 15% who say, I really don't like any of the candidates, another 15% who say I'm not interested. But you can see how these answers all kind of fall in line with these constellations. And these constellations kind of, they sort of bounce off each other. So the more salient, the more interested, the more motivated a person is to vote, the more likely they are to transcend some of those obstacles of, this is a really super important election, so even if I have to really organize my day to take time off and get to that polling place, or, hey, I have more time to vote, I can, in places where there's early voting, maybe it's a boring election, but I now have 2 weeks to vote in other jurisdictions that have early voting. So all of them kind of work together. And so when we as a commission work to make a set of recommendations, and those are set forth in the report that we put forth, we were really looking for recommendations that affected those 3 sort of constellations of barriers or issues, and also really took into account what we think were things that could be cutting edge or innovative where that opportunity was. And we wanted to also look at what could we really do to move the needle, to really make a significant change, not maybe just bump up turnout by 2 or 3 points, but really a significant change. And based on the research, based on people we talked to, we really concluded that the first recommendation was to make elections more convenient and accessible by aligning them with even-numbered June primary, November of even-numbered years. Now, that itself, I personally feel, and I had a statement in the report to this effect, that this alone is not a panacea. This is not going to do it. If you don't do all the other things we recommended as well, this is not just going to be like waving a magic wand and whoo, turnout is going to come up. So a couple of other things we said needed to be done with that. First of all, we need to have election equipment that can handle the long ballot. You are going to have a longer ballot, and so the county is going through a very innovative process of updating its equipment, so it would mean we'd have to really consolidate elections with a county. We would need to really, do even a better job. The city does a wonderful job of voter outreach and voter engagement right now, but it can take it to the next level. It would have to do a better job of that. And then we also said, you know what, we really should figure out how much this costs. But the city council should really look at how much this should cost. And so we see that first recommendation of the consolidation and the alignment with the even years elections as a real way to move the needle as long as you do everything else we've recommended. We also had 2 other alternate suggestions if the city council did not want to move forward with that. One would be to move to June and November of odd-numbered years, and then the next alternative would be at least to give us a little bit more time if we're going to stay with the runoff election or the general election when it is, move the primary a little earlier so you don't have such a collapsed schedule. We also made recommendations, and I'll do this real quickly because, like I said, at least in my mind, this is a package deal. We made recommendations about increasing voter engagement and voter registration. Representative of neighborhood councils, one of our big recommendations is we should work more closely, city should work more closely to promote voter registration and voter engagement with neighborhood councils. Again, there's the city of Los Angeles came up with a 10-point outreach plan as on a report that they did. We wholeheartedly endorse that 10-point outreach plan. And in terms of accessibility, if we have the right voting equipment and we consolidate, having early voting at least 2 weeks before, thinking out of the box of where there might be more accessible locations. Can we find the right places in, for example, like a mall that has a community room? Why not use that rather than a person's residence? And like I said, we really wanted to think about what would be a package, but what would also really have a significant increase in voter turnout. And those were the primary recommendations that we made in our report. And again, this is something that we were all very passionate about. We care very deeply about the city of Los Angeles. The city is one of the most diverse, if the most diverse in the nation, so anything we recommend has to be done taking into account that diversity, taking into account the need to do outreach in appropriate languages. But that's what makes Los Angeles so strong. Our city is stronger when people participate and have their voices heard in our democracy, and that's what our recommendations are intended to promote.
Again, thank you. You should let me, you remind me to say that we've had the 2020 commission, which was an independent commission. They were the first commission to give us a set of recommendations, and one of those recommendations was consolidation. The commission that you sat on, Ms. Gold, was a commission that was formed by the mayor and myself. And if I remember correctly, that commission came out with a set of 33 recommendations, with the number 1 recommendation being consolidating the elections. And also the city report, or the reference that you made, they came out with 10 recommendations, one of which was the consolidation as well. But we recognized that we would get a boost but I think all of us agree that it's the beginning, it is not the end. We're already beginning conversations about having talks with the school board to try to get engaged about, civics classes and things of this nature. Somebody mentioned earlier, it could have been Jason, about the fear of, our voting, the cities being down so low. We're looking at making a request of Sacramento to grant cities over a certain size the opportunity to be higher on the ballot. We're engaged with beginning engagements with states like Minnesota, where they vote at the high schools, and they have the students literally run these elections. They're monitored by adults, but it's the training that we give our youth at a young age to say to them, this is not a privilege, this is a responsibility. And, a revolutionary war was fought to give us this great country that we live in today. So I just wanted to make those announcements, and we're going to hear from what I wanted to do, Nathan, was to let the other two speak, and then we'd have Adam. Very good. Okay, so I'm going to go to Mr. Hicks, and Reuben, you'll be the closer.
My colleague from the business community gets his rightful position for the last word, so I'll sure I make my time good. First of all, thank you, Council President Wesson, for giving me the opportunity to participate in this panel on what we consider to be a very important issue, and that is making sure that the voice of working folks is not only heard on the job, but also heard at the ballot box. So giving more hardworking men and women in Los Angeles the opportunity to participate in their government is obviously a very important issue for us. When I say us, I'm talking about the LA County Federation of Labor. I'm the political director there. We're an organization of 325 affiliated unions representing about 700,000 workers across the county of Los Angeles. I just wanted to touch on a couple issues that I think are really at the core of voter turnout issues that we have in LA, one of which I'm not sure if we can do a lot about, the other in which I think we can. The first issue is just the fact of mobility. I think LA, unlike any or most other metropolitan areas, is the amount of mobility that you have from one area to the other is significantly higher. The 2011 census looked at the national annual move rate being at 12%. In the same period of time in LA, it was 22%. So you have every year nearly a quarter of people who live here moving from one place to the other. And it's unlikely that they are going to register as soon as they move. It's not the first thing. It's not like, I'm getting water, I'm getting electricity, I'm registering to vote. We wish it was, but the reality is it's not. Generally, they're gonna register to vote when there's something exciting on the ballot, so there's a large number of renters in the city of LA, and homeowners are probably twice as likely to be registered to vote and to have steady vote history than you would have from renters. So the mobility, the movement within the city, within the county, is unlike any other. I'm not sure we are going to fix that issue in the short run, but one in which we can, and that is really there's a lack of engagement around not only what's on the ballot, but when we hold our elections. The amount of resources that are spent around state and federal elections dwarf that of municipal elections. If you looked at the amount of money that is spent by every entity, candidates, independent expenditures, member communications, every city agency, and compared that to what was spent in state and federal elections, I would suspect that it is dramatically smaller, just simply because there's not the same level of resources that's dedicated to earned media, paid media communications to draw attention to, hey, there's an election and there's some stuff that you need to vote on. And so, LA's standalone elections in odd years of March and May, it doesn't, you think about the amount of money that is spent for a movie studio to promote one movie. I mean, it's in the tens of millions of dollars. You see that kind of activity around state and federal elections. You don't see that around a municipal election. It just simply isn't the same. So I think the mobility issue is not going to be fixed overnight. I think the level of engagement issue and the resources that are spent on engaging voters is something that we can take a look at. Rosalind spoke to sort of a package of recommendations. I think a couple of those are really important to changing the overall voter experience in LA. The first of which is just simple registration. In order to vote, you got to be registered. That's the benchmark requirement. I do think DMV pre-registration, especially with six voters that are those that are getting their license that are 16-year-olds, you can pre-register. We really need to step up the pre-registration push within LAUSD, especially at our high school campuses. There's also some kind of maybe different things in which we can do, and that is, for instance, registration through DWP. When someone, given the mobility and the movement, when someone goes to turn on their water and power and sets up a new account, the DWP should be able to cross-reference that name, that information with the registrar's voter database. And if they're not registered, give them the opportunity to register and maybe even give them a slight credit on their bill for having done so. So it's another way in which government is interacting with an individual to potentially get them registered. And then also it was spoke to about the digital interface. The City of LA has a great web portal that provides a lot of information. There's no reason why that can't be applied on the registration side. And then the other thought I would say is around education. There was a study that was done, I believe it was a couple years ago. Only 35% of all Americans could actually name all three levels of government. Another 30% could name one level of government, one branch of government. So that means that 35% of Americans cannot name one branch of government. And that's really a failure. And so not only pushing LAUSD to help with the registration, but reintroducing civic education from an earlier age than just the last year of high school is, I think, really important. With regards to the larger package of bills that are being, a larger package of issues that are being, recommendations that are being talked about, I agree that it's not the end-all be-all with regards to consolidation. But if you were to make one change to have the biggest impact, I don't think there's any change that you could make that would be as significant as moving the elections to even-numbered years. If you looked at the likely participation in a municipal election and then a likely voter participation in a gubernatorial or a presidential election, it's not even close. You're talking about 20% for a municipal election, in the ballpark of 50% for a gubernatorial and as high as 70% for a presidential. I know there is some concern about down ballot drop-off being too long, too complicated. I do think changing the order of the ballot is an important thing. I think down ballot drop-off probably gives even a net gain in voter participation for making that change. with regards to, I think the biggest impact comes in the way for young voters. And that's why I would say moving these citywide elections to the presidential cycle is critical. If you look at voter turnout amongst voters under the age of 35 in a gubernatorial general election, it's 31%. Overall turnout being 50%. Under 35 is 31%, and over 35 is about 60%. If you move that same election and put it in a presidential election, under 35 participation ends up being 65%. So there's a difference of 33 points in likely turnout for a young voter between a gubernatorial general election and a presidential general election. So if the change is going to be made, and you are trying to get as many voters in LA to participate in their government, and you're going to make a substantial change like that, you should give the most voters possible to participate in that election. And I believe that's moving the citywide to a presidential election. There's been some talk about concern around a transition period where there would be some current electeds who may get additional months, a year and a half, I believe, 17, 18 months. I believe that voters would probably see that as if you told them this is a one-time change in order to align elections. I think voters get generally skeptical when you say, we're going to allow incoming electeds to get an additional X amount of time. If you tell them this is a one-time change in order to align the election, I think even though you're potentially extending terms, I don't think you would have an issue at the ballot box. And then the last thing I would say is just make a comment around the lottery. I think it's a novel idea.
Why don't you save that,
Okay.
Rusty, the lottery, because the next time we kind of come back to you, I'm going to let Nathan kick it off and let him kind of help me guide that conversation. But we definitely want to hear your views and anyone's views on any subject. And before I go to Reuben, Mr. Hicks talked about a drop-off. During the commissions, didn't you guys gauge or try to ascertain what that might be?
We did not feel that there were enough studies of cities like Los Angeles that we could come up with a precise amount of the drop-off. We talked to several political scientists, and kind of the consensus is, yes, there will be a drop-off. I mean, we've seen some, I should say we did see some research from smaller cities, a couple of other cities that still indicate even with drop-off, you end up with more people casting ballots for those municipal races. So you still are going to see some bump up in the number of people actually casting ballots for municipal races based on other cities. But we didn't want to try to calculate for Los Angeles because we do think Los Angeles is unique. So.
I get that.
Yeah.
Mr. Gonzalez? Thank you for coming.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President, Councilman Weezer, commissioners, neighborhood council members, friends, Romans. The best part about going last is I can claim that I had the same ideas these guys had and the same great information, but I don't want to be repetitive, so I will make that claim right now, and I'll take up a lot less time than I would have. So my name is Reuben Gonzalez. I am Senior Vice President with the LA Area Chamber of Commerce. Earlier you used the word crisis, that this is a crisis. And the lens that the Chamber looks at this through is that we started in a crisis. In 1888, a handful of business people got together because there was a real estate bust and people were fleeing Los Angeles. And they got together to figure out how they could stop that exodus and save this town. And so throughout the 126 years since, the Chamber has kind of two hats. We see ourselves as the voice of business and the business advocate, but we also see ourselves as a trustee of this community and this region. And that's really the prism that we see this through, is as a trustee. And it's not good for this city, it's not good for this community to have a voter turnout that's so low. It's not good for this city, it's not good for this community to have a voter turnout that's not as diverse as it should be, given the diversity of our community. And so we believe that the recommendation for consolidation to even number years is a definite and necessary step, not the only, but most significant on the table to alleviate those concerns. I have to be honest, I hear, when I say this, I get a lot of political experts who look at me with shock, because they say, well, wait a minute. The higher propensity voters you have, the more progressive those voters are. Isn't that not in your interest? My first answer to that is, well, again, we look at this as a trustee, and we're not going to do something negative to the community just because it might not be in our interest. But secondly, I think the dynamics here in Los Angeles are quite different. I believe that, frankly, moving to the even number years and creating a larger pool of voters possibly hurts both myself and Mr. Hicks and every other special interest or stakeholder involved with a specific agenda. Because in the end, when you're a special interest and you have an agenda and you're trying to drive that agenda and you're trying to impact city elections, the smaller voter pool you have, the smaller number of voters that come out, the much further your dollar can go. We have certain council districts in this city where being able to turn 3,000 votes or 3,000 voters out will flip an election. And that's just sad when you have council districts that have hundreds of thousands of residents being represented. I mean, it is literally sad. I can't think of another word for it. And so maybe it does, to some extent, work against our self-interest in that way, but I would rather have a larger pool of voters, a more diverse pool of voters, younger voters, who are all raising their voices, and maybe I just need to do a better job of reaching out to them. And that would be the next point, is there's been a lot of discussion of ballot fatigue, and having run campaigns for about a decade or so now, yes, there's going to be ballot fatigue, but I think other speakers are correct and other experts are correct in that on the whole we're going to see more people turn out. But we need to become better educators. We need to become better campaigners. We need to actually proactively do the job to get folks to get to the bottom of the ballot. Use the political hacks, use the campaign folks. Find out how you can best, and the marketing folks. Rusty talked about those who market movies. Use these folks. Find that brain trust. How do you reach the consumers? Don't treat them as voters, treat them as consumers. How do you drive them towards the action and make it worth their while to vote? People have lots of priorities these days, more than they ever have before, more variables, more stimulus coming at them from every angle. And they make their decisions on what they spend the one commodity they can increase, time, for two reasons: what has value and what has risk. So we need to figure out the best way to communicate to the voters of this city value and risk in the voting process, what they gain and what they lose. We're not doing that job. And so that should be our focus. Create the infrastructure that brings more people out, and then create the infrastructure that better educates them. I'm very heartened to hear about the idea of getting to the schools and getting them as early as possible to show them the value and the risk from a very young age, so it just becomes second nature to vote. And a lot of the issues brought up here about, again, confusion, focus, fatigue, expensive races. Trust me, again, I've run campaigns for over a decade. The campaign experts and the candidates will find a way to reach the voters. We'll find a way to do it. We just have to step up, and so does the city. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, I'm going to go to the president of the Ethics Commission because I know, Nathan, you had a few questions. After Nathan's, and if Mr. Weezer has something to say, I'm going to call on, I think it's a Carlston Cook, a Gregory White, and a Christina Coolidge. So, Nathan?
Thank you very much, President Wesson, and thank you everyone for being here. The fact that people will take time out of their day to discuss voter turnout issues in Los Angeles is truly impressive. I mean, if voters took as much time out of their day to actually vote, we wouldn't have to have these meetings. So the fact that people are really willing to give some serious thought to deal with the crisis that President Wesson quite correctly describes is very enheartening and inspiring. But let me tell you where I come from on this. And where I come from is sitting as the president of the Ethics Commission in the 2013 election, giving out close to $10 million of the city's money. And when you say, by the way, there wasn't a lot of money spent in the municipal election, Mr. Hicks, there was $65 million spent in the 2013 election. I mean, granted, it's not billions that get spent in a presidential election, but $65 million, which represented $10 million approximately in matching funds, about $41 million that the candidates raised, and then about another $14 million or so in independent expenditures. So I'm thinking to myself, you know, the money has only gone up in politics, and we were comparing it between 2001 and 2013. The amount had gone up for these mayoral elections. And then we looked at the voter turnout, and it was downright depressing. The voter turnout had gone drastically down from the mid to high 30s to the low 20s. And now that we're dealing sort of with an off-year election, I mean, we're not even dealing with the citywide election coming up in 2015, but we're dealing with, you know, certain council districts and LA Unified School Districts that are up for election. When we looked back at the 2010 numbers, it was downright scary. To talk about 3,000 votes turning an election, I forgot which district it was. I think it's the 6th district, where 9,000 votes were the only votes cast out of about 100,000. That meant that you needed 4,501 vote. And by the way, that election was won in the primary in 2010. Sir, you don't need 3,000 votes to control that city council district. You need about 1,000. Maybe 500. 500 well-placed votes could probably turn that seat, maybe 1,000. And that's downright scary. So I asked myself, and we asked the entire Ethics Commission and the staff, what are the ideas out there to change this and do it in a dramatic fashion? Because I agree, incremental change is nice when your numbers are in the 30s and you're trying to get to the 40s as far as percentages. But when you're in the single digits, which was the special LAUSD election we had in August, I think it was 8.5% voter turnout. When you are in the teens, which was the 2010 election that we had for the very council districts that are up for election in 2011 for 2015. And then when you're in a mayoral election in the low 20s, we can't afford incremental change. I've looked at your proposals. I think they're excellent proposals. The question is, how fast can you do it? My understanding is you change the cycle for the president, even if you can get around ballot fatigue issues, election fatigue, and you align the city elections with the presidential elections, gubernatorial elections, and the county elections. My understanding is that's not going to happen until the end of this decade at the earliest. That's 5 years away, plus or minus, at least 4 good years away. I can't stomach, as a Los Angelino, 4 more years of abysmal voter turnout while we're hoping for the magic bullet or a magic bullet as we implement other recommendations, education, and all this along the way. And I ask myself, what are other countries doing out there? What are other cities doing? What does the sort of research say that are possibilities? So as we explored with President Wesson when he came to speak to our commission, there are 2 models out there that we saw for immediate results. One was the Australian model, which is the stick rather than the carrot. Australia goes ahead, and it doesn't penalize you much, but it's $20. You don't vote, you got to pay them $20. You don't pay the $20, then you might have to pay up to $200 as a penalty for not paying the $20, but it's $20. Their voter turnout in the Australian election, going back decades, is in the 90s. The 90s for all of Australia. Now, I don't think the Australians, they're pretty casual people, as generally I know Australians. I don't think that they're thinking that it's any more or less convenient to vote in Australia than it would be in Los Angeles. They don't have, the electronic voting. They got to either go to the poll or do it absentee like we do here. Yet somehow they've developed a culture of people just knowing that voting is part of what they do. And by the way, they have a lot of elections. They vote on average twice a year in Australia, not once a year, twice a year. So, we kicked that around and we said, do you think that the stick would work here in Los Angeles? And people are pretty much saying no. The general thought is that penalizing people, making them pay money if they don't vote, isn't necessarily the way to go. So then we looked at the carrot, and we looked at the research and the literature on the carrot, which is a voter drawing, voter incentives, voter lotteries. And when we looked at it, the results are not shocking. They're actually what you would expect. So if I could tell you that the elections that were produced in 2011, somewhere between 12 and 18% voter turnout, if we could get that in the 40s overnight by March, by May, if I could literally say we'll get a 40 or more percent voter turnout, double it in the space of 6 months, what would you say? Would you say that's a bad thing? Would you say it's something that we shouldn't do? Well, there's 4 major arguments that say the idea of a voter drawing is bad. And let me just address all 4 of them. The first one, it says, okay, that just makes me sick. The gut punch. How dare you pay for people to vote? People should want to vote. We should view it as a constitutional obligation to vote. It just makes me sick that we've come to the point where we have to pay people to vote. Remember, it's not technically paying people to vote. What would happen in a voter drawing is the mere act of voting qualifies you to enter the drawing. And then we decide the pool, we decide the prizes, but we don't tell people how to vote, who to vote for. In fact, they can vote for no one. They can literally just show up if they want to at a voting poll or send in an absentee ballot, go through the exercise of at least getting to that point, and going ahead and doing it and voting for nobody. It's just the act of voting that qualifies you for it. So on the idea of it makes me sick, and we're doing it, I point people to other constitutional rights that we have in the system, that we bled for, that we fought for, that people should view as sacred. The right to serve on a jury. Now, I've served on juries. I'm a lawyer. I appear in front of juries. I've yet to find someone show up at the courthouse steps on a Monday saying, I'm here to serve, find me a jury to go serve on. We actually penalize people if they don't serve, and then we incentivize them if they do. The penalty is we send them a summons, and we say, you have to show up on this particular date, or you can sometimes move the date once or twice, and if you don't, and you've been notified, we're going to find you in contempt of court. You can be fined $1,500. You can even be imprisoned if it's a repeated violation. So much for not penalizing people for a sacred constitutional right. But we go one step further than that. We tell people if you've served a day or more of jury, or more, not only are we going to pay for your gas, obviously, but we're going to go ahead and give you a small amount of money. I think it's $15 a day. Well, it's small in the initial amount for one person. It amounts to $15 million for the city of Los Angeles, by the way, as an FYI. That's how much. It's actually more than $15 million. We pay in aggregate to have all those jurors serve on those juries. So we're already, with a sacred right, penalizing people and incentivizing people. Yet how many people here think that somehow we have debased the right to serve on a jury because we've done it? Or that we've commercialized jury service, or we've somehow degraded the sacred right to serve on a jury because we've penalized it and we've incentivized it. The reality is nobody thinks that, because it just became part of what we do. And we accept it, even though if you started from the beginning and didn't have penalties and incentives, people might say, ugh, that makes me sick that we have to penalize and incentivize people to do their jury service. The second argument is one Mr. Hicks sort of touched on, And God bless, Mr. Gonzalez for saying one of the most candid and honest things I have heard ever, I think, in a political forum, where someone is willing to actually talk against their potentially their political interests because it's the right thing to do. And it's this. One of the criticisms is, okay, we're going to bring a lot of uninformed voters into the voting place, and that's a really bad thing. Well, and by the way, the people who view it in sort of a Machiavellian terms, either special interests potentially or particular parties, think, aha, where are all those new voters going to vote? Are they going to vote for me, or are they going to vote for somebody else? And if you think they're going to vote for somebody else, you don't want them in the voting place, as Mr. Gonzalez said quite candidly is one of the criticisms or the observations he's had to deal with. And he said no. He said, I'm the trustee. I want those people in the voting place. It's my job to convince them to vote for my candidates. But I want them to show up. Now, if a voter drawing gets people to show up, then it's Mr. Gonzalez and all the special interests and everybody else's job to educate those voters and tell them where they should vote. It's, as you said, you divide it into two, and it's perfect. Make them show up, educate them. And if a voter drawing can make people show up for whatever reason, the same reason people will show up at Tommy's, because Tommy's once a year on their birthday gives a free hamburger. And the line is across it takes 2 hours to get a free hamburger for $4.95, okay? I hope people's time is worth more than $4.95 for 2 hours. But they'll sit in line because they have, in this case, they're going to get a burger. For a voter drawing, they have a potential to win a little money. So the idea that you're going to bring all these uninformed voters, I think, is actually wrong. I think that it's based on a key assumption that people are uninformed and will stay uninformed. Because right now, if you know you're not going to vote, and there's this flood of campaign literature, it's coming your social media, it's coming your email, it's coming on TV. Are you paying attention to it? No way. Why? Because you know you're not going to vote. 8 out of 10 Los Angelinos, for the most part, know they're not going to vote. So why pay attention? Why get informed? Well, if all of a sudden you actually are going to show up, even if you're showing up to enter that drawing, you might start paying attention to what's going on. And then you got Mr. Gonzalez's organization that's going to hire some of the Hollywood PR people, knowing that 400,000 more people might show up in a mayoral election. Let me say that again. We had 400,000 people show up in the last election. That's about 22%. Imagine if we just get it to 44. That's 800,000. 400,000 more people are going to show up to vote. Hallelujah. Now Mr. Gonzalez has to go ahead and figure out how to convince those new people to vote for his candidates. And he's fully able, as people are like him, to figure out how to convince those and educate those 400,000 people because they're showing up to vote. I'll conclude with this one last thought. Symptoms versus cause. People think that what voter drawing does is that it deals with symptoms and it's not dealing with the cause, and I agree. I mean, the fact that we even have to propose a voter drawing shows the crisis that we're in. But just like you wouldn't, if a patient came to you very, very sick, and you couldn't figure out the best way to deal with the cause of the sickness, but you could lower the fever. You could deal with the cough, and then hope that the body politic gets strong on its own as you reduce the symptoms. That's basically what a voter drawing potentially offers. So if it's okay, if we could ask Mr. Hicks, because he obviously had some thoughts on this, if he could respond briefly to what I'm saying, or if you'd like to do that.
No, we'll do that, but what I want to do is get some more community people engaged now. And like I mentioned to the panel, we'll come back at them with this subject and maybe more, and we just really want to get how you feel. And for the people in the audience, any idea. There's no such thing as a crazy idea. Let us hear it. Okay, Carlston Cook, or hopefully I'm right. Gregory, who promised me he would be here today, you're next. And Christina Coolidge, followed by Candido Morez. So go right ahead, sir.
Thank you, Councilman, council members, distinguished guests, and member of the public. My name is Kirsten Cook. I'm coming to you today as a constituent, but over the last 10 years, I've worked professionally in mobilizing, registering, and turning young people out to vote. As we all know, youth voter turnout is increasingly difficult to mobilize, and is why I strongly support the council's proposal to moving municipal elections onto presidential and gubernatorial election cycles to increase youth voter turnout. Since 1978 to 2012, there has been on average a 20% difference of youth voter turnout for presidential elections versus non-presidential elections. We've also seen a decrease in voter registration numbers, falling from 1974 at its height of 56% to 49% in 2012. The lack of money and resources allocated to midterm and off-presidential elections also have a detrimental effect on voter mobilization, communication, registration, and GOTV efforts. It is also my belief, after reading the report from California Common Cause, that moving the municipal elections to presidential off-cycle years will help increase voter turnout by upwards of 20%. And I also feel that with the increasing nature and financial instability, the increasing transitory nature and financial instability of young people, moving the election cycle to presidential and gubernatorial years will also allow them to register and be ready to vote versus having to re-register every year after they move. As someone who is a millennial and a young voter, I can let you know I am professionally employed, financially sound, and I still move every year, and it does take time for me to register to vote. So on behalf of what will be the largest demographic in American history, young people ages 18 to 35, getting them registered and mobilized and having them turn out, having that electoral process be positive and something that is engaging will help sustain long-term civic engagement throughout the course of their political involvement. Thank you so much for your time, and thank you for the council.
Thank you. And like I said, I'm averaging this out to about 2 minutes and some change to the speaker. So Gregory Wright and Christina Coolidge, are you here? Yeah. I see a hand. Okay, I see you. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm Gregory Wright, a resident of Sherman Oaks, a longtime poll worker, a member of the Sherman Oaks Neighborhood Council Green Committee, and a board member of Americans for Democratic Action of Southern California. I start with the larger American electoral picture. I believe the United States should move its federal election day from the antiquated Tuesday workday to the more worker and family-friendly first or second weekend of November. Los Angeles could help move the nation in this direction and, I believe, increase its voter turnout by holding its municipal elections and county elections too on a new Los Angeles election weekend, possibly on both Saturday and Sunday. So I support the thrust of Election Reform Commissioner Jeffrey Darr's minority report that recommends a weekend election day in Los Angeles. A Los Angeles weekend election day such election days would occur largely at our public schools, and as Council President Wesson has just described occurs in Minnesota, could be conducted in some large part by high school students, helping their elders, their neighbors, and their own families, parents, siblings, and even grandparents exercise their right to vote, making the Los Angeles election weekend both a family and an educational affair. Also, a two-day election weekend would provide more time for our polling precincts to conduct same-day voter registration, which I also support. Furthermore, weekend election days would allow more people who work full-time during the week to serve as poll workers, some of whom could use that extra income. If the voter lottery proposal goes forward and brings a lot more people to the polls, we'll have even more reason to have a two-day election weekend in order to provide what could be a much greater turnout for both reasons. Many other countries in the world vote on weekends, and they have, most or all of them, a larger voter turnout. So I think the evidence is good that if the United States, perhaps prodded by Los Angeles, moves its federal elections to the first or second weekend in November.
Gregory, wrap it up.
I think that the whole country will notice, and that will be good for democracy in Los Angeles and the entire country. And I hope we move forward with a Los Angeles weekend election soon.
Thank you. If I could get Christina followed by Candido. Welcome.
Hi, welcome and thank you. I'm Christina Coolidge and I live in Sherman Oaks, and I'm a poll worker and a board member of Americans for Democratic Action of Southern California. And as with Gregory, I would like to see the change from Tuesday elections to the weekend for many of the same reasons. And I support Jeffrey Deere's minority report for proposes weekend election days in Los Angeles. I would like to bring something else up, and that is looking at the big picture nationally. What is happening in other states is voter suppression. This is very real. We pretend like it's never going to happen here. And I mean, I certainly hope not. I mean, that's one of the reasons I live in California. But this may sound silly, but just take North Carolina. What are they doing to suppress the vote in North Carolina? Well, why don't we do the opposite? Thank you.
No, but thank you very much. And this hearing is about increasing, and I agree with you where it relates to there are so many states trying to suppress the vote, and I'm proud that we're studying ways in which we could increase it. So, Mr. Moraes?
Mr. Wesson, Mr. Weezer, thank you very much for being here. I know it's been a long day. Candido Maris with We Do Love Van Nuys and We Do Love Los Angeles. I would like to introduce someone here today, Mr. Carino De La Cuesta. He's a member of the Van Nuys Neighborhood Council. I hope he'll speak later because a few years back he was not involved. So I want to know from him what made him become a member of the Van Nuys Neighborhood Council, one of the best, and he's unbelievable. So that's what we need. And all the ideas that we've heard tonight are good, but I'll be honest with the gentleman, I'm sorry, behind the, he stated that we don't want just a bunch of people voting because we're going to get the numbers out. We want people who are informed. And I think you're missing one of your biggest assets. And I'm old school. I believe in pounding the ground. I know you, Mr. President, Mr. Weezer, when it comes to campaign, it's all about getting your people out to get out those votes. If we take a look at the different council races, some go up to almost 20,000 as far as voters. Then we have the 6th district where with under about 6,900 votes, you can be elected, yet someone in another district will take almost 15 to 16,000 to be elected. So what do? The neighborhood councils are 95. There's 95 of them. We have 1,800 members. Now let's take the volunteers that go with them. Why don't we utilize them? The neighborhood councils were formed because they wanted more participation from residents. Well, Mr. Jay Handel and his group did a wonderful job at the last election by increasing their numbers. Why don't we take those people, give them incentives? The neighborhood councils would be awarded by informing the voters on the elections, the dates, and this would happen way in advance, not a week or 2 weeks or a month before the elections, but maybe 3 to 6 months beforehand. And the incentives for them would be that the neighborhood councils that showed the biggest increase would get some kind of money reward to their neighborhood council. So instead of $37,500, they might get $45,000. So there's the incentive. But again, we have the people in this city that are willing to do the job. We just need to utilize them, and I hope that you'll take that back and say, let's move forward with using our neighborhood councils. And I hope Mr. Jay Handel will address that a little later. Thank you.
Thank you. So let's. I'll get back to the folk that are in the crowd, but let's go and see what the panel thinks about Commissioner Nathan's idea, which I have to say this. I was excited to hear his suggestion and committed to try to ask people what they think about this idea. And the first week that it came out, within the first 6 days, I had more conversations about voter turnout and voting in 6 days than I probably had 6 years prior to that. It was emotional, it was controversial, but it got people's attention, and just the conversation, I think, will help us turn out some voters. So with that said, we're going to start with you, Rusty, and work our way to my left. Mr. Hicks.
Thank you. As I was beginning to say, I think I would agree with the council president that it's an interesting idea, a novel idea that has sparked quite a bit of debate and conversation, and for that we may actually get a couple extra points in turnout. And I think anything that we can do to turn out additional voters is something that we should consider closely. You talked about issues falling into 4 categories of what people, of concerns people have or opposition that people have. And I guess the first that I would sort of key in on the first one you said, and that is the gut punch. I mean, I generally think if your gut tells you that something's a little off with an idea, you should at least think about it twice. I think lotteries in general target poorer communities. There are clusters of sales around poorer communities for a reason. And so some might say that's a good thing in the sense that we are targeting those voters we're trying to turn out. But I would say a systematic targeting of poorer communities, which essentially incentivizes gambling of a form, is something that we should think carefully about. And at the same time, I spoke about consolidation. And I don't know, and you talked about a doubling of turnout within a short period of time. I haven't seen that empirical data. I don't know of any empirical data that says that voter lotteries result in additional turnout, and I'd be interested in seeing that, but I haven't seen that. Consolidation results in additional voters absolutely coming to the polls in a way that is proven, that is shown without incentive. And so I should be very clear that our organization does not have, the LA County Federation of Labor does not have an official position about the lottery. So I'm speaking on behalf of my own reaction to the idea of the lottery, and that is one that if we decide to move in that direction, we should think very long and hard about doing so for the reasons that I said.
You can go right ahead.
You're familiar, I'm sure, with the lotteries that exist in many states to encourage people to save. That there are actually in Nebraska and 12 other states, situations that they encourage people to save $25 a month. And if they hit $25 a month, they get a ticket into a lottery that can give them up to, they have actually monthly prizes, quarterly prizes, and a big annual prize. The statistics from that have shown that the savings rates have not gone up just 20%, they've gone up 200%. Whatever people decide that the chance of winning something encourages them to do some behavior. Obviously, we have a lottery here in this state dealing with, in part funds our education budget. What I want to make clear here is that we're calling it a lottery for ease's sake. It's not a lottery, actually. It's a drawing, because you don't have to pay any money to actually enter this. The same people I was talking about who are in line in Tommy's, that is actually a very interesting multiracial, multi-economic strata of Los Angeles that'll sit in that line. You'll see people driving up with sports cars. You'll see people walking up. They sit in the line for 2 hours to get a Tommy's burger for free that cost them otherwise $4.95. Here, it's unclear whether or not it'll just be low-income people who want to be in this lottery, or even high-income people who just decide that they want to try something and haven't voted. What we know for certain is that 8 out of 10 Los Angelenos that aren't just the poor folks, this is everybody in Los Angeles, aren't voting. And whether or not the lottery, in fact, there are no statistics on this on what exactly would happen, because no city has actually done it. So we really don't have that type of data. It's more extrapolation from other situations that lotteries or drawings have been used, and the psychology that would go into them applied to this forum by political scientists. So I completely agree with your gut punch comment. But the question is, if we could get in 2015 and not have to wait till 2020 for the 20% that you talk about, are you willing to allow the election to go forward in 2015 with abysmal voter turnout? And by the way, not just in 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, and all of a sudden in 20, maybe we get the 20% pop that the consolidation will get us. But until then, our democracy is threatened by the fact that 8 out of 10 people don't even want to show up to vote.
Okay, let's move on to Ms. Gold.
Yes, I also just wanted to echo my colleagues' comments about being very much appreciative of the innovation and definitely going out of the box in terms of really looking at a crisis and trying to think about things in a very different way. So I commend you and the Commission for really, bringing this issue to a head. I think our main concern is that this will require a use of resources, and it's essentially taking city resources for a certain set of priorities around elections and putting it into that particular set of priorities. And, you had talked about in terms of the work of once you get people to the polls, educating voters, and you talked about my colleagues on either side, well, that's their job. Well, we actually think, no, the city has a responsibility to do voter education. City not only has a responsibility to do voter education in a nonpartisan way but educating people about the process and where to go to vote. The city has a whole lot of other responsibilities in terms of voting. They need to make sure that the polling sites are accessible. They need to make sure that poll workers are well trained. They are spending about $484,000 in 2013 on their own voter outreach program. And unlike, I don't want to speak for my colleagues on either side, but I suspect the people that they tend to target with their outreach are high propensity voters. The city is in a unique position, and this is one of their recommendations, to look at where do we have low turnout and target places that have a high number of eligible or high number of registered voters, but people who are not registered, and work with completely nonpartisan GOTV partners to focus on low propensity voters to build that turnout. So the question we would want to say is, in a time when we have scarce resources, where do we want to put those resources in terms of what the city of Los Angeles should be doing about voting? I think I would be interested in, seeing a little bit more about what we think the total cost would be. What would the city have to stop doing if it started to do this instead? And I think also, I think we would be more interested in learning about, are there any other municipalities that use a drawing for elections? Are there any countries that use a drawing for elections? And what's the long-term impact on turnout? Is there a sort of bunch of fireworks that go off the first time it's tried, and then people sort of say, okay, great, this only happens every 2 years or however number of years, so I'm going to go into it once. What is the long-term impact? I am not willing to wait too long, but I certainly hope that if we make a fundamental change, that we do it right, and we get it right, and we use our resources in an effective manner. So that's the questions and concerns we have about the proposal.
Let's hear from Reuben.
Well, much like Rusty, I'll split the hair and say that the chamber hasn't taken an official position on the lottery, so this will just be the musings of myself. First of all, I feel that gut punch, and it just kind of makes me go. And I think that should be a wake-up call to us, that if we're going to the point where we're trying to come up with, and I don't want to say this in a negative tone, but a gimmick, that adds to the seriousness of this discussion, because we have a real problem if we're leaning towards that. I was disheartened in that in all of the challenges and crisis in this election process, this was what the media decided to really cover. And so I think we may need to give a little tough love to our fourth estate to say, you need to do better, because that's a problem. As far as the lottery itself, my suggestion would be to pilot it. Pick a district or two. If you're really serious about figuring this out, don't go in whole hog, don't spend all those resources. But if it's something that really catches fire here and there's the momentum to do it, I'm still not sure that it's necessarily the right thing for us to do. Pick a council district and do it, or a couple, if you need to see how it impacts, different diverse areas. And then after that, do some significant analysis of it, maybe some focus groups in those areas of voters who did it, and see what the impacts truly are before you go all in.
I want to jump in because I'm going to ask Mr. Nuys, but I want to make this point crystal clear that I do believe if we consolidate the elections that we will get an increase, but I also believe we'll just be dealing with a symptom. So with that said, this conversation is just beginning. I think we will move step by step to try to look at ways in which we can do this. So there will be additional conversations with the residents of this city about the voter lottery, civics classes, all of that. But what we want to do is something that we can at least put in place now. But this has been a very, very fascinating conversation, and I really appreciate what the three of you and others have had to say. So with that, I'm going to, Mr. Nuys.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you for continuing this conversation. We've had a number of these hearings now, and as our president said, this conversation will continue. As I've said at previous meetings, my view is that let me say just that one underlying thing that I keep hearing is the importance for us to look long-term as well. Not only to things we can do now to immediately increase, but long-term. And the underlying issue I keep hearing there is the civic courses at our schools, and to ingrain it in our young people, the importance of not only voting, but being civically involved. I recall when I was on the Board of Education at LAUSD that we were attempting at that time to have more civic courses beginning the 8th grade. That was a conversation we were having back then. But I think that is going to be a very important component that as we move forward, that's not necessarily under our jurisdiction, but we could certainly work with LAUSD. As our president has mentioned, those conversations have begun. On the issue of the lottery, I've expressed at previous meetings, I was one of those gut, reaction people that it just didn't hit me well, or it probably hit me too hard. But my view on that was that when we ask people to vote and then they ask us why, our response is, it's your civic duty. Now, implied in civic duty is that we won't get something in return, right? That a civic duty, you're doing it because you're doing it free. You're not going to get a reward. You're not going to get paid. You're not going to. It's just that's what everything that goes with that, right? People have died for this right, et cetera. But so if we have going to move forward in a lottery, we have to change our discourse as to why we tell people to vote. And so I still have something that doesn't sit well with the lottery for the number of reasons expressed here, although I was really engaged and was following quite closely the points that were made earlier about why we should have a lottery. But it's an ongoing conversation, and I'm here mostly listening as we move forward and we start moving this in different directions. I think the president has done a very good job as ideas come up. They're being explored or pursued by our CLA, by our CIO, and looking at the ins and outs of any of these ideas that are possible. And so I'm continuing to listen here, and this is a very good conversation, not only that we're having, but I think it's going to have tremendous payouts as building a better city in many other ways once more people participate. Thank you.
Okay, Nathan, and you may want to respond to the other couple of panelists, and then I need to go back to the audience, and then we can have at it again with our dear friends that are here with us today.
Yes, and I very much appreciate the panelist's view. I think that they come at it from a very common sense approach, a approach that says, show me the proof, and that's the way it should be. I think to respond to Mr. Gonzalez's point, it was always envisioned as a pilot project. Yeah, and whether it's done on a primary election, a general election, some districts, all the districts, those are the details that certainly would need to be worked out. But it was always to be envisioned as a pilot because we weren't looking to embed this in the law and then have to pass another law to get it out. So that's point number one. Point number two for Ms. Gold. I think Fernando Guerra, who spoke at the last panel in City Hall on this issue, had an interesting response to the resource issue. His idea was to use a nonprofit foundation to actually come up with the money. That there's a way it can be done, a legal way it can be done, where the prize money for the drawing would actually come from a nonprofit. So still, you'd have to study. I mean, the city clerk's office would be in charge. They're already in charge of certifying an election 21 days after the election. That means that they've already counted the votes and certified that these are the exact number of votes of voters that we are going to accept as legitimate votes in this election. At that moment in time, we would basically have them use an algorithm or whatever the drawing and lottery people use to pick whatever names out of the virtual hat would be the winners of the particular drawing. So I don't know how much if the drawing prize money comes from a nonprofit and not from the city, if the city clerk's office is basically in charge of pushing a button, and the algorithm program isn't that expensive, I don't imagine that there'd be a huge amount of expense to do this. Maybe on the front end, when we're educating people, they'll throw in the message, oh, and by the way, if you vote, you become, you're eligible now for a drawing. And so the question then, whether you call it a gimmick, and I guess the first time people proposed a lottery to help fund the state education budget, I'm sure if I read those articles and heard panelists say, oh man, what a gimmick to fund the state education. I'm sure when they talked about these savings plans in 12 different states, and they tried to increase people to save by giving them a lottery ticket, what a gimmick. I'm sure that when they talk about these type of situations where you're incentivizing people to do stuff, you can call it a gimmick, or you can call it, as you were calling it a moment ago when you were talking about Hollywood kind of appreciatively and their PR department, an interesting way to incentivize people to do what they otherwise should do. Because what does it tell you, as City Council member Huizar just said, what does it tell you about the state of our democracy when people are asked when people say you should vote, and they say, why should we vote? And the answer is civic duty. What does it tell you about our democracy that 8 out of 10 people are willing to abdicate their civic duty, not feel the obligation to even show up to vote? What does that tell you about civics in Los Angeles, civic duty in Los Angeles, and our democracy in Los Angeles? Maybe it is a gimmick that we need to actually get people to vote and show up in the first place and then educate them. But we're at a crisis level, and we really can't wait till 2020 to address it in a more than incremental way. If this pilot project has a chance, I would say perhaps give it a chance.
Thank you, Commissioner. Now, what we're going to do, we're going to go to some more cards, but I'd like for the three of you to give some thoughts to, and this is kind of based on what you said, Reuben, about this could make it, for those that do campaigns, more challenging. Maybe you can help walk our folk that are here, the audience, through, you start a campaign, you figure out how many votes it's going to take, and then how this would affect that. I think it would be very interesting to those who have never actually, ran a campaign. So if you could give some thoughts to that, I'd like to call Jeanette Hopp. Please come forward. You're going to speak. Oh, there you are. You're going to speak from your seat. And again, thank you and your colleagues. We've got a good turnout. This is a good conversation. Thank you. We appreciate you.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you and Mr. Hockman and Mr. Weezer for this opportunity to speak on this forum and to co-host. I would also like to let you know that my name is Jeanette Hopp. I am the treasurer of the Van Nuys Neighborhood Council. I'm also a budget advocate, so I do really care about the city's budget. And I want you also to know that I have volunteered for 26 years in the past for LA Unified, and I don't know if Mr. Weezer will remember, but I address the board often. And I'm the one who spearheaded and got the board to agree to let students in their senior year volunteer at the polling places as part of their
Excellent.
volunteer time to help get the credit for the volunteerism, but also at the same time, it's a twofold thing to let them know what the process was all about and to try to engage them. As a parent of two young sons, I had them both come and work the polls with me because one of the other things I've done for going on 30 years is be an inspector for both the city and the county for elections. And I've had my sons work the polling place with me a number of times in the past so that they would know what was going on. I have to tell you that it is my feeling that we need to have more polling places, but what I would recommend is to have the satellite polling places, which they tried a few years ago. I think if they had more of them and they utilized libraries and other facilities that both the city and the county utilize, it would save funds. But if you have those kinds of things, I think you'll get the kids out to vote, because what they don't understand is really how important it is. But as someone else so adequately mentioned, it's their time. They all grew up with gadgets. They all grew up with cell phones and PCs and computer games and what have you, so that they know what that's all about, and they're very much into that. And that is a way to engage them. And if you have something like that that they can utilize and be able to vote and feel like they've done some good, I think you'll be able to engage more of them. One of the other things is to get more education out there. We do have a serious problem with that, and maybe a large part of that is because a large part of our population, as was also previously mentioned, is immigrant, and many of them I don't think, understand the process, let alone the importance of the process. Once they become a citizen, because they went through so much of an effort to do that, they realize how important it is, but they may not still understand. So we need to educate. We need to engage the kids by getting some modern technology utilized, as my cohort Howard mentioned. I think that's a wonderful idea. And more of the satellite places, because if you give more opportunities for them to vote, not necessarily on a weekend, but just more places that they can go and utilize, I think you will get more of them out to vote. And then incentives, I don't have a problem with incentives, as Mr. Hockman so nicely put it. I was feeling like Mr. Weezer initially, and then when Mr. Hockman put it the way he put it, I thought, that actually not so bad. So I guess if how you sell it makes all the difference in the world, and perhaps that'll be what it takes to get people to realize their benefit. I have been on many a jury and would never turn that down, but I'm one of those people who decided when I was raised, if you want to get involved, if you want to be a part of the process, you have to be involved. My parents volunteered, I therefore volunteered, and I got my children to volunteer. It's all in how you're educated and you're raised. So if you really care about your city, your county, your country, you will get out and do that, but sometimes people have to be reminded. So I thank you for this opportunity, and I think we're hearing some wonderful ideas.
And I agree with you, and I thank you for your service. I think I have a Jay Beeser. If you're here, please come. And I have Hans Johnson. Come on up. And followed by a Bob Peppermuller, I think. Yes, sir. Go right ahead. Oh, I'm giving you 2 minutes. So if you see me kind of do that, that means
I'm timing myself.
It's time to wrap it up. Go right ahead. Thank you for coming out, too.
Thank you. My name is Jay Bieber.
My bad.
It's my bad writing. So, anyway, thank you for bringing this here for a conversation and for the to the Valley. So, thank you very much. There's a number of things that were said tonight that I agree with. I'm not going to go over all of them. I think there's a lot of interesting things about consolidation, moving the dates, moving them on weekends, and things like that. The technology, things of that nature. I think those are all really good and interesting ideas that we should look at. But what I want to focus on is the fact that we seem to think that this is a problem with the electorate. I don't think it's a problem with the electorate. I think it's a problem with the electorate feeling that their voice isn't heard, no matter who they vote for. And I think that part of the problem is that when they do vote for people, they don't get the engagement from the city council. I've heard from somebody the other night who said that they were excited about voting in the last election, but then after the councilman got into office, they couldn't get the attention that they needed, and not just because the councilman didn't agree with them, but because they just couldn't get what they needed done.
He wasn't from my district.
No, it was not from your district, as a matter of fact. But I want to mention, so this is a really important thing, and so while I don't have a whole lot of time here tonight, what I want to say is that when the city council, people feel that the city council, rightly or wrongly, the perception is that there is a lot of backroom deals, there's a lot of stuff that goes on, and their voice isn't heard. And one of the ways, and this may be a radical idea, and it's not short term, this is long term. One of the things I think we should look at in the city of Los Angeles is expanding the size of the city council. I don't want to scare anybody up there who's on the city council.
People have suggested that.
But we have, New York has a much larger council. Chicago has a much larger council. What this will do is each councilman is representing about 250,000 people or so. If you have that, you can get people much closer to the people that they represent, and then maybe people will be excited about voting for certain people. They'll get to know them better. They can outreach better because, quite frankly, they do target the people who are the high propensity voters. And so thinking about that, so just to wrap up then, one of the things I think that makes people come out to vote is not incentives. It's having exciting and interesting and great candidates that they are excited about voting for. And that's what we really need to look for.
Thank you. I'm going to ask you to stay there for a minute and just say we have a very open committee process. Get engaged with that. You'll see how we actually twist a bill or add amendments or what have you. And the public is generally given an opportunity to speak their minds. It is very easy, and I'm not doing this as excusing us. It's just so easy to accuse us of all of these backroom deals, and I can assure you that just really is not the case. And the candidates are going to be the candidates. The candidates come from us. They come from you, the people in this audience. They come from my area, this area. Some of them are more open and exciting than others, but it is, what it is. Every 10 years you'll get a very inspirational, motivational type of candidate. So I just felt compelled to just share that with you, Jay. But I do appreciate very much that you're coming down.
As disclosure, I am the second vice president of the Sherman Oaks Neighborhood Council, and I am very engaged. People that know me, I am very engaged with this.
I get a feeling.
So yeah.
That comes across
Right.
very positive.
Thank
Because we need more of that, and I appreciate you.
Right. Thank you.
Mr. Johnson, followed by Mr. Pepper Mueller. Yes, sir.
Hi there, Mr. Council President and Councilmember Weisar. I'm Hans Johnson. I'm president of the East Area Progressive Democrats. I'm proud to be here tonight representing our more than 200 members stretching across the greater East area of Los Angeles. I'm here to speak to our letter to the council to respond to the proposal to change election dates in the city of Los Angeles and to speak to the concerns that we cite in that letter. First, I want to say that our primary motivation is to increase turnout in city elections and to increase genuine civic participation in Los Angeles City. I want to note that in a moment of crisis, it should be our first motivation to do no harm. And I want to express our concern that the gimmickry at issue here is not the proposed drawing, on which we have no official position. Our concern, in fact, is with the gimmickry of shifting election dates, particularly to even years. And I want to be very clear that our concerns on this are deep and profound, that the issues expressed here tonight and some of the data points shared are not true. First of all, turnout in primary elections going from odd years to even years actually dropped in 2014. Turnout in communities of color in Los Angeles to reflect the diversity of our electorate actually dropped precipitously in some cases. 17%, 16%, in the case of Latinos in Los Angeles, 36% between our odd year election to an even year election. The notion that special interests' grip on our elections would be lessened in even years is actually wrong. The danger in shifting to even year elections and moving our city elections, not consolidating, but consigning city elections to the climate of even year elections, which is dominated by corporate and special interest money that dominates our state election environment in California, is actually increasing the power and the authority of special interests and corporate money over our city elections. That is a great danger that our members are very concerned about. Finally, the notion that it would save money for the city to consign elections to that even year period is flatly wrong, because we would be abandoning our system of matching funds. If we were to compensate for the additional turnout in even year elections, our matching fund investment would have to go up markedly. That would more than cover the cost savings proposed under the consolidation or the consigning of our elections to that environment. I want to say that it is a deep concern by our members that we are prepared to oppose any change like this. We hope for increased turnout, but we will not see our city elections that we enjoy the process of deliberation around consigned to the Wild West of state election environments so dominated by corporate and special interest money. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. And Mr. Weezer, do you want to? Okay. Anyway, this is America. We have everybody's opinion is important, and everybody's opinion counts. Bob, come forward, sir. And again, thank you for coming.
Thank you. I'm Bob Peppermiller from North Hollywood and a member of the Midtown North Hollywood Neighborhood Council. I knew this meeting was coming up several weeks ago, and last week I spent a week in Carson City, California, Nevada. Oops. Let me read you the headline from the Nevada Appeal, October 12, 2014. Carson City Clerk Recorder hopes voter turnout here tops 75%. That's 75. Now, I'm not going to go into the reasons for that. I have no clue as to why. We've given here tonight a lot of reasons of why people don't want to vote. But my request is this. I would like to see somebody study the Carson City voter population and find out and understand why they have such a high voter turnout. And that's my request, is to study the Carson City voter population to find out how come they have such a high voter turnout. That's it.
Thank you. Thank you for coming out, and thank you for providing your thoughts and ideas. Mr. Previn, Eric?
Greetings. I'm Eric Previn, and I am a resident of Studio City, California. I had the opportunity to run for county supervisor in the 3rd District in the primary election for the county this last year. I was sort of an active watchdog. I would go to board meetings, pay attention, got involved, and then the election came about, and I thought, hey, I'll give it a try. I thought it would be, without raising a lot of money, possible to raise up my voice and participate. And, I was wrong. I didn't do extremely well in the election, although I did have a good experience and I participated where I could. But I think that the investment that the LA City is doing in this particular program is commendable. I know everybody's looking at the low voter turnout. The county had the registrar recorder, Dean Logan, down the other day, also talking about ways to meet voters closer to where they participate, the idea of some kind of internet thing down the road. And they're doing a sole source contract for $15 million to look at some of the new technology. So I think that's good. One thing that I think might be helpful, though, in terms of spending the money wisely is one piece that's, I think, this chap mentioned, the media is slightly defective in our market. They don't really cover local politics. I mean, local news these days is, the pit bull attack, and now we have some crime, but people don't get a feeling for the issues. And maybe there's a way that the city could bring the PBS or the public stations, or even spend some money to sponsor debates, both at the county or the city level. And I don't mind the idea of putting the city the county together. But the debate process for at least the county election was not a fair level playing field. It didn't, as you know, the 3rd district, for example, in the county, we only have 5 supervisors, and it's 10 million residents, so you think 250,000 per councilman's a problem. This is an enormous, just to get your name and a description of your platform in the ballot is $18,000 just to sign up. So I wasn't able to afford that. But I think by fostering real debates and having a chance for what you were dreaming about, Mr. Wesson, the engaging candidate who can actually connect to people, well, you can connect to as many people as you want, but if there's incumbents who are seated on reliable voters, finding in that environment, and so Hockman makes the good point. By the way, I commend you, sir, for this idea of the lottery. If it was your idea, I know it's a good idea. It's not an idea that I think is going to solve our problems, but it might jumpstart things. But I absolutely think that by investing in a kind of infrastructure where people can reach out and raise their voices up, we'll do a lot better at getting people to flood into the system. The neighborhood councils are little arms of the city, and they work well. But yeah, I'll wrap it up momentarily. But one question I had was, you mentioned in Australia that it was a $20 penalty if you don't vote, and that they have 90% voters there. But then we went past that very quickly to we wouldn't want to do that. But why wouldn't we want to do that? We do put a $20 penalty on people for all sorts of conduct, and that would bring them in more reliably because, it's not the voting itself, it's the campaign, it's the engaging. And so, maybe someone could address why the $20 thing wouldn't be a good area. I think it would, the stick rather than the carrot. And thank you for your interest.
Eric, like I said earlier today, this is not the end. This is the beginning. And this, I'll say to you, Nathan, is one of the first public speakers that said maybe we should scratch the surface a little more where it relates to this policy. So as we proceed, I will add that to the list of things to have a conversation about. So thank you for showing up. Thank you for being engaged. So the last person I'm going to call, then we're going to go back to the panel, is Denise. Okay, help me, Denise. Selesnik. I would have got there eventually. Selesnik. Now that you say it, it's so easy. Thank you for coming out. Thank you so much.
I'm speaking to you with 3 different hats tonight. First, I am the contributor to City Watch, and I cover neighborhood councils, city politics, and Mr. President, we've talked. I'm also active in the neighborhood council system, and I'm an American by choice. I immigrated here with my parents when I was 8 years old, and so I take the voting very, very seriously. And I was alarmed when I saw, in fact, I wrote about it, when I saw the lottery or paying people to vote, I was appalled. Because all of the people around the world that line up, and even in the United States, that line up around the block for miles to vote, and we're complaining because we have a 23% turnout. I did some investigation because we have a really big reach with City Watch, and proposed the idea that the neighborhood councils take an active part in getting out the nonpartisan vote. But we went one step further, and that is neighborhood councils would have to submit a plan to the election committee first, a marketing plan as to how they would proceed in getting out the vote. I think we increased our vote for the last neighborhood council election by about 40-something%. The other idea that we've investigated and which I would like to see is a student congress. When I was 17 years old, I was a delegate to a student congress at City Hall, and Rosalind Wyman,
yes,
before she was Rosalind Wyman Weiner, was the speaker. She was 26 years old, and she was the first woman in many, many years to be elected to the city council. And it made such an impression that I have been an activist since that time in all areas. And I think that a student Congress, we've looked at doing it regionally because there are regional issues in Los Angeles. And by doing it possibly with 6 student congresses, getting the mayor's office and the city council involved, we've done some research on it. The neighborhood councils probably is a good place to start. So if you want to get the kids, you know, I'm a perfectly good example of that from many years ago.
Yes, it sounds like it. Thank you again. Okay, I'm going to get back to the public. Don't worry about running out or anything or that I'm going to run out, because that won't happen. But I want to go back and I want to flip the order, okay, because I want to talk a little bit about the mindset of consultants and things of this nature, because we did have a gentleman indicate earlier that he feels that it will be the opposite effect. Okay, so I think he thinks it would be easier for them to influence. I want to hear what you think about the current system, how it works, and so just have at it.
Okay.
Reuben?
Well, you wanted me to run through just kind of the mechanics of
Yeah, so
campaign
people
real
kind of
quick.
understand what happens.
Just, basically, your candidate decides to run for office, and after they've been deemed certifiable, you, not you two. Just the
Some
others.
nights I feel that way.
Yeah. In Van Nuys on a, so then you have to decide, you actually go to the data. I mean, this is part art, part science, and it starts with science. You go to the data, you look at the voter file, you look at the last X number of elections as a consultant, and you come to an idea of how many voters are going to turn out, and that's based on the patterns of voting, how many candidates in the race, what other overlapping elections there are, which phase the moon is in. I mean, there are any number of formulas depending on which consultant or expert you talk to. You look at those and you do some more calculations to figure out first, how many votes do I need to get into a runoff, given the number of candidates expected. And then the next calculation is, okay, once I get into a runoff, how many votes am I going to need to get to 50 plus 1 and win? Unless you're lucky enough to get to 50 plus 1 in the primaries, at least the council president likely will this year. Once you do that, you turn again to the research and the data, and you go and you do polling and you do research, assuming you can afford it, or you try and look at other folks' polling and research in your area or in the past, and you want to see what do those voters look like that are turning out? Who are they? What are their demographics? What are their ages? What are their incomes? Where do they live? Who's high propensity? So many different data sets, and again, it comes down to resources to be able to do that. In some sense, if you're someone who's been in the community a long time, you just kind of guess. If you don't have the money to do that, or you can't tack on. And then once you see what that pool looks like and what the subsets are, then either through polling or again through experience, you find out, okay, which of those subsets are my voters? Who's going to vote for my profile as a candidate? Okay, so that's my voter, or my different types of voters. Now I have to go and reach those voters and make sure they go to the polls. So then you use your message and your messengers through different forms of media to reach out, and you knock on doors, and you get on the phone, and you send out mail, and you do social media, and you do every possible way to reach out and have that conversation. So that's at its most rudimentary, the campaign process. The challenge. So now with the low voter turnout, you're doing one of two things. You're fighting for the people who you know are going to turn out, and you're trying to turn out people who aren't those high propensity voters that you know are going to turn out in these off-cycle elections. So it's a race. It's a race for a small pool of voters, and to some extent, in the end, again, the candidate. Everybody likes to say the candidate with more money wins. That's not always the case. I mean, if we look at the last election in Council District 13 especially, where Mitch O'Farrell won, it wasn't resources, because resources are a means to an end. The end is name ID.
Our controller had little resources, so I mean, it happened.
You know, so but in the end, it's if the kind of candidate you are immediately resonates with a community, because of who you are, and like Mitch O'Farrell, you've been in the community for over a decade and you've shook hands with every one of them, or maybe in the terms of our controller, just the profile that you had resonated with people. Sometimes that helps replace the money. Money is a way to buy name ID. Money is a way to buy interest. Money is a way to buy and ways to drive folks to the polls. So that's in the current process. That's kind of how things work out. The issue and the concern that folks have with consolidation is you're going to have so many layers of elections and so many candidates at one given time that there's only so much bandwidth in the media, both earned and unearned, and just in the mind and the ability of the voter to focus. So it's challenging to get somebody elected in the current system. It'll be challenging to get someone elected in the new system. But either way, it's just a matter of candidates and consultants being more creative, being better, having better messages, and being better messengers. So I think, and it depends on the level. For a council district, you're not really talking about television, and you're not really talking about radio. So there's still expense, and your mail's going to be more expensive. It's going to be less effective because there's going to be so much mail in people's boxes. Calls are going to be inundated with more calls. So that's a bandwidth issue. I think this will affect citywides quite a bit, merely because, as far as cost, because you're trying to get up on the airwaves. And if you're a candidate for mayor, controller, or city attorney, and you're trying to get up on the airwaves, and you're challenging the media buys from folks running for governor and senate and statewides and president, that's also going to be a problem of cost, because you're fighting for only a certain number of minutes on the air. So those are challenges, but you just got to build a better mousetrap.
My opinion is that I think it makes it much more difficult for labor, makes it much more difficult for business, makes it so much more difficult for special interests, because there's only so much money. Oh, I don't know the response, but there's only so much money to go around. I think if you want to see a guy or lady from the community win, this puts them in a better opportunity, because when you have a limited amount of money, good people, if you don't vote, you're not going to get any mail. If you don't vote, they're not going to knock on your door. Okay, the young people are not going to get anything. So these are some of the things that in order to give people a fair shot, I think we need to look at ways to do that. So, Rosalind?
Our organization is nonprofit and nonpartisan, so we don't support or oppose candidates, and we do voter mobilization, but we don't do it in a partisan manner. However, what we do is we do learn lessons from political consultants, because they know how to reach people, they know how to develop messages, and again, we use some of the same mobilization techniques as consultants, but we go after low propensity. We specifically target low propensity voters. And so when we looked at this, we talk a lot to political consultants, and when I was on the commission, we talked a lot to political consultants as well. And the bandwidth issue, both in terms of the resources you need to reach the public and your ability to raise money from contributors, was of great concern to some consultants. But then there was a sense we did not get a definitive answer. We had other consultants who said, you tell us exactly what the playing field is, and we will innovate, we will do what we need to do to get our candidates elected. So as long as we know what the playing field is, we will adapt, we will change, we will be resilient. So we heard both of those when we talked to political consultants. But what I just wanted to say is there was no consensus that consolidating elections would be the death knell of campaigning in the city.
Okay, Mr. Hicks.
Well, given I'm going last, I think my two colleagues probably said almost everything there was to say. The reality is campaigns really come down to who you're going to talk to, what are you going to say, and when are you going to say it. And if you change when the elections are, and it's likely that 50% more of the registered voters are going to show up to vote, and so campaigns of all type are going to talk to those voters specifically, it is going to get more expensive in order to do that, simply because there's more voters. Everyone doesn't just speak to high propensity voters. As Rosalind said, that we also target low propensity voters because in a lot of ways those are our folks. And so I think the thing for us to keep in mind is that this is not about the candidates. This is not about, to use the term that's been thrown around tonight, about, quote, special interest. This is ultimately about the residents and the voters of the city of LA having a say in who sits in their public offices. And so I think to say, it's going to be more expensive, I would say that that's the price of democracy. And so if folks are already going to go to the polls, we should find a way to give them the opportunity to have a say in their municipal government, not just their state and federal government.
Thank you. Reuben, you want to jump in again?
I just wanted to go on record that anything that makes it harder for labor to be influential, I'm in favor of. So let's do those first.
That's where he's wrong.
That's if you could just, Ms. Ghost, share with me just your concerns, concerns where it relates to low voter turnout.
In terms of...
However, if we could, I think you started off.
Right.
And I think if you could just kind of...
Yeah, I think that, we want to live in a city where the policies that affect our day-to-day life, how our streets are cleaned, what kind of opportunities do our kids have, what kind of lives our families have, that there is accountability from the public servants who, really make this tough decision to become a public servant and to run for office and to serve, that there is accountability and responsiveness. And when you have low voter turnout, you can end up with a situation where those public servants don't feel accountable to everybody who are their constituents, but to those who are actually turning out to vote. And as importantly, people's preferences in terms of candidates, the preferences of people who are high propensity voters may not always be the same preferences of low propensity voters. So essentially, people become disenfranchised and they cannot choose the leaders that they feel will make the policies and make the decisions. So democracy becomes meaningless as a concept when you have low voter turnout. You don't have people feeling that the leaders that they choose are accountable to them, and the leaders may or may not feel that they are accountable to the citizens. And I think also it is a part of, again, voting is just one act in participation. So, we see that there is some relationship between people who vote and people who get involved in their kids' education and meet with their children's parents, or people who go to neighborhood councils. So it's part of a whole spectrum of participation, and voting is just one point on that, but it's sort of a gateway for a lot of people to start to get, hey, if I'm going to vote, I want to learn about the candidates. I want to maybe go to a local community meeting. I want to see who's educating my kids. So it has that role also in the overall scheme of civic participation. So like I said, it not only makes sure that our democracy is accountable and people choose leaders that they feel will make policies that are in line with their preferences, but it also creates a ongoing connection of people with civic culture.
Thank you. Before I go back to the public comment, I just want to inform everybody that the city staff that are here tonight, they're not getting overtime or anything like that. And I was going to ask you to give them a round of applause because they do work hard, and I want all of you to know that I appreciate you coming out. We couldn't have done this in a professional manner if it weren't for the help that we've gotten from all of you. So, Jay Handel, Joseph Siegel or Segal, and Miriam Vogler. And then when I finish with public comment, we'll go to you guys to close. Mr. Handel.
Good evening, and thank you for this opportunity. It's very interesting to listen to. I've broken a few things down in short-term, long-term pilot program because I think there's a lot of things we want to achieve, but it's going to take a long time. I look at short-term as going to the even years, getting that real mass of people to come out and vote. I look at short-term as voter outreach. Okay, and I'm going to go into that in a second how. Easy things. Free up parking at locations for voting. People can't get to park, so they turn around and they leave. It's impossible to park. And if they do get into a space, they end up with a ticket because they're in a loading zone. Electronic voting. You want to do a pilot program? Pick a district and do electronic voting. Because in today's technology world, why are we still trying to figure out how to make a longer ballot and a machine that's going to read it? Let's go and get out to the people that are using the electronics. Weekend voting is long-term as far as I'm concerned. Same-day registration. We should implement that as soon as possible. Same-day registration. Marketing and branding through all of the city lists, including DWP and every list that we have available to us through every department and every employee that has a list for people. We should take a look at the lessons learned in the neighborhood council system. Councilman Weezer, your district was my district. I oversaw the district for neighborhood councils. When we didn't have the money and we couldn't do the outreach, we had 22 candidates. We took a 1-week extension, we got the money from the department, and we ended up with 255 candidates. The neighborhood council system had a 24.9% increase in candidates. It had a 28.9% increase in voters.
Significant, Jay.
And it had a 44.8% increase in volunteers. In your district, Mr. Weezer, what we did was we mailed to every single mailbox in your district for 7 out of 8 neighborhood councils in that area 3 times. Everybody was touched 3 times with nonpartisan, be a candidate, come to a town hall, get engaged, come out and vote, here's the candidates. Or the last wrap-up, because I can see the finger running. The lottery tells me, it proves to us, we've given up on good government. We've given up on reaching out and trying to get the people to come out and really understand what the voter process is about. Woodrow Wilson said, "The government which was designed for the people has got into the hands of the bosses and their employers, the special interests. An invisible empire has been set up above the forms of democracy." This is the feeling of people outside on the street. We need to change that. That's a culture change. Thank you.
Thank you again for coming, Jay. Mr. Siegel?
Yes.
Followed by Miriam. In fact, again, I can't say enough for all of you to come. spend all this time. It is greatly appreciated, and we're learning a lot from the things that you're telling us. So now, the floor is yours.
Thank you. My name is Joseph Siegel. I own Campaign Web Solutions. I develop websites for candidates and causes, nonprofit causes. And getting people to turn out to vote is kind of my avocation and my hobby. And what I do, every time I vote, I go around and talk to my own neighbors and invite them to come with me. And usually the response I get is, hey, there's an election today? So most of the people, I'm talking about 9 out of 10 people that I talk to where I live, I'm from Northridge, do not even know there's an election going on that day. And recent studies have shown that most people in the United States aren't even aware that November 4th is going to be the next midterm election. So we talked about how we need to do more civic education, how 30% of people can't name the 3 branches of government. Well, let's just let people know when our elections are. One of the first things I learned about campaigning is you have to ask somebody for their vote. What are we doing to ask people to show up to vote? So in advertising, and that's my background, we know that you have to show somebody an ad, you have to ask them to come look at your product or service at least 7 times before they click on a banner or come visit your website. But I can't recall ever seeing an ad, a commercial, a PSA on TV through Time Warner inviting me to show up and vote at the next election. So what can we do to create PSAs? We have this great resource called Hollywood, and we have a celebrity culture here in America and here in California. So let's use some of this great resource in Hollywood and get some of our celebrities, Kobe Bryant, whoever, to do PSAs, making voting cool, making citizenship cool, and inviting people to come out and exercise their franchise. So I'd also like to see
Joseph.
I'll wrap this up. I'd like to see a celebration of citizenship. So we can have a citizen celebration day in our parks where we can have some of you folks and our other electeds come out and meet people in our neighborhoods, have speeches, voter registration, music, and make participating in our government and meeting the people who make decisions that impact our lives a part of our lives.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Miriam,
Public outreach, I think we need that.
get to the mic, dear.
I got my clock here, so let me set it up now.
You have yours, I have mine.
Okay.
Go
All
ahead.
right. I'm just saying right now, we need the outreach, because I used to do voter registration, very important, and I tell people they need to learn about government and about the people who are running. They need to get to the source by having people being informed and encouraging them, and also having representatives involving them. We need to involve people being part of our government, and part of it is speaking at meetings like this, and that will help them promote them to become educational voters. We need to reach out, no matter what it takes, we need to reach out to them, because otherwise they say to me, what's the use in voting if, because they don't listen to you anyway, okay? You only get 1 minute to speak. I mean, that's kind of, ludicrous, 1 minute. So, and people turned off because a lot of times politicians, they just give you the code, they lie, and then they go ahead and are corrupt. What we need to do is educate them to let them know that our government should be reaching out to them and not turning them off, because that's a quick way, that's an obvious indication how you can get people to not want to vote, okay? I know people like that, and it's unbelievable. It's a very high apathy out there, and we need to do is return it around, because otherwise, no matter what you do, you're not going to get them to do it, even the young kids. My daughter, I tried to get her to do it. I tried to get her to re-register, even though she's not here. She's not here, so her ballots can come into my place. And can I do? So these kids are not seem to be very interested. First of all, they got a lot of other things they want to do. So what you need to do is involve them in government, and if you don't, they're not going to be doing it, no matter what you do. Thank you.
Thank you. We have another Siegel? Leonard? Come on. I somehow mixed the card up, or I would have called you guys up back to back. Welcome, sir.
Thank you. Okay, I'd like to thank the council members, commissioners, and others for your efforts to save and improve democracy. So here are some of my ideas, inspired by you saying, think out of the box. Okay, so like my brother said, talk to Hollywood community to have them, but what I'd like to suggest, have them model voting and civic engagement on TV shows. When Tony Soprano went to therapists, all of a sudden the amount of men, tough men, whatever, going to therapists, seeking out therapists significantly improved. Let's see if we could do that for voting and other civic engagement. Support the Secretary of State's mock elections to have public school students practice voting before regular elections. Provide color commentators for city meetings, maybe like this one, but especially city council or school board meetings. They have them for sports and TV and on TV and radio to make the events more understandable and engaging. Include and allow people to vote on different issues that are coming up, so people practice voting on a regular basis. And then people then have practice voting and making it more of a habit. The Congress has the GAO, the Government Accountability Office, where they get nonpartisan, non-biased information so they know how to vote. Now, they could choose to ignore it because someone paid them, a big donation, whatever, but at least they get the nonpartisan, they know how to base their decision. But we as voters, we don't have something like that. We have to figure out, okay, which commercial is lying to me and how much. But we should have a nonpartisan GAO for voters. Okay, and now here's basically my last one. Explain to the public the non-voter tax. See, legislators don't mess with Medicare because they know that senior citizens vote and a high percent. And Medicare is indexed to inflation. However, students carry the largest debt load in the United States currently, and legislators know not too many of them vote, and so they're not getting the kind of support they need. Minimum wage workers haven't had an increase for many years. Legislators know that most of them don't vote either, and the minimum wage is not indexed to inflation. If most of them were, so if they were to explain, here's how many millions or hundreds of thousands of dollars you have lost every day, every year because you're not voting, there's your money to go ahead and incentivize them. And just for your information, the Teacher Quality Commission is now taking comments in their new updated report on teaching civics in school. And
Great.
Last thing, and if you want to increase the amount of people who will promote voting with your new drawing, if the amount of money goes up, the more people you have voting, then that'll incentivize people to bring all their friends out to come and vote also.
Thank you. So do I have Gary? Gary, I don't know if I can forward dice or close. And we're almost done. Yes, Gary.
Gary Fordyce, you're correct. Thank you. It's a privilege to be here today. I'm a member of the North Hills West Neighborhood Council. I'm a board member. I'm a veteran, and I'm a precinct inspector for a number of years now. A lottery is an incentive for personal gain. But what will be the quality of the election results? Consider that we live in a society that gravitates to, quote unquote, it's for the children. Voting is a civic privilege and a right. Let's direct that privilege toward community gain, not personal gain. Therefore, I propose a lottery for community gain. How so? Let the collective precincts within a city or a neighborhood council district with the highest turnout collect, I don't believe it's really a lottery, but a prize, benefiting their community to include the local schools and or libraries and or parks, this could be done, promoted by churches, schools, PTAs, because it's going to be their community gain for their children. So in closing, I would also strongly believe that neighborhood councils should be registering voters and promoting participation. They're the perfect outlet if they utilize that mandate that the city charter gives to encourage participation and involvement. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, now I have 2 cards that were submitted after we began our testimony. But because I do appreciate you coming out, I'm going to ask you to be quick. But this will end our public comment at this meeting. So I believe I have a Mr. Schaefer, Mike, and I have a Donna Pierman. Donna, you will wrap things up. Mr. Schaefer, welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I went to one of these earlier meetings in your council district on the same topic and found it very interesting.
Thank you.
My name is Michael Schaefer. I'm the president-elect of the Hollywood Kiwanis Club, and I'm a retired election lawyer. Along with Roger John Diamond, I'm the father of the non-alphabetical list of candidates. Thanks to us, Mr. Huszar can be on the ballot at number 1 instead of in the middle, okay?
That's great information. I wondered about that.
You'll always be last, except not under our program. And last is the second best place to be, by the way. I have 3 little ideas I'd like to share with you. I second the ideas on parking. When I went to vote up on Rowena a few years ago, there were signs, "No voter parking here," in some areas. And we know that enforcement is told to be slack on election day, but the public doesn't really know that. And I would like to see each precinct have one of their people figure out how to have some signs and make it quite obvious. In fact, the sample ballot ought to say on it, there is ample parking. That's to invite you to come. I think that's a positive. Second thing is, I like the idea of having some important people do public service announcements, but they don't have to be real people. We can have Spider-Man, or Disney can give us a couple of stuff. That's really how to make us cool. And if 9 out of 10 people don't know it's election day, I have another idea. Let's get some of these superhero guys to wear an Uncle Sam costume that day and put one in every precinct with a little sign. Hey, vote, it's election day. And people driving around are going to say, hey, I forgot to do that. I think those Uncle Sam's in costume, that'd be a good investment. And my favorite one, my very favorite one, I'm a big fan of Living Social. I'm a big fan of Groupon. I want to see 100 restaurant people be our good citizen restaurants and agree to give a 2-for-1 to anyone bringing in their voting stub. That voting stub will be something that you're going to be sure to look for. You're going to treasure it. You're not going to let it get lost, because you know that the 100 good citizen restaurants, and I will personally sign them up, they would like the publicity, will welcome them for a 2-for-1 meal, okay? Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. President.
Yes, Mr. Weezer.
I was wondering where I was going to be for Halloween, and I couldn't figure it out, but I'm going to be Uncle Sam now for Halloween.
I did that once.
You did that once?
I did that once. It was a good get-up. Miss Pierman.
Okay. Thank you for letting me speak. Took me 45 minutes on the bus. Anyway, we need more outreach. I think if we put banners all over the place to let them know when it's election day, that would be good, because if people if they see it, they'll say, oh, I need to vote today. And the politicians need to go out and do more outreach and have more meetings and let people know what they want, because otherwise people say, I don't know what they're for. Anyway, I want to tell you, the people are reluctant to vote, and one reason why is because when you vote for a proposition, it gets thrown out because it's not constitutional, and so people begin to feel that maybe what their vote doesn't matter. And I don't feel changing the elections are good at the times, because I think it'd be more confusing. And if you have a way big ballot, people say, oh my God, this is too confusing, I don't want to go out to vote. And I'm against the electronic voting, I just want to say, because I see the electronics coming over more and more, and nowhere are you allowed to even do it, but you have to do it online. So pretty soon, if you start with online, it will take over. And how do you know these people won't find a way to vote 2 times? Vote by mail, vote online. So it's really got to be looked at carefully. And not just make sure that you still have the vote by mail and vote by person if you do electronic. And, if you want to, it's really up to the politicians. If you want people to go out to vote, you got to get your voice heard so people will know exactly what you're standing for. So.
Okay.
Thank you. All right, that concludes our general public comment. I'm going to ask the panelists to quickly wrap up, and then I will ask the other members of this committee if they have a quick closing statement, and then we will end this very interesting and exciting hearing. So let's start with Rusty. We'll start with you.
Thank you. I think the debate and the conversation tonight has been great, and as you said, I think this is really just the beginning of the city of LA beginning to address this issue, this crisis, and we look forward to working with both the council as well as the residents of LA in order to get a real solution.
Ms. Gold.
Council President Wesson, Council Member Huizar, and Commissioner Nathan, again, thank you so much. At the Naleo Educational Fund, we have a saying, invitation plus information equals participation. And so, as far as we're concerned, part of the invitation is making sure that elections are held at times and places that are accessible to the public, and that is one of the reasons we think that consolidation is a definite, very positive step towards increasing turnout. But again, it can't be done without the other part of invitation, with outreach, and without the information of both voter education and better civics education and the other recommendations we need in our report. We have a world-class city. We need a world-class democracy to go along with it.
Thank you. Mr. Gonzalez.
First, I'd like to offer to be a color commentator on city council meetings. Happy to do that. And I'll echo the other speakers. Grateful to be here and grateful for the conversation. I just like to leave with one parting thought. I mean, we've had a kind of a constant pattern in the conversation here to say, let's get them to the polls and then let's educate them. Maybe what we should consider is flipping that. If our main, not silver bullet, but if our main action seems to be, or at least in these discussions, is the consolidation of the elections, and that's going to take us several years and maybe a cycle and a half, why don't we make the decision to do that and then build a process between now and then to better educate voters, so that when we've created an infrastructure that's going to bring out more voters, that they're educated at that time.
Thank you. And I want to say again to all of you that are here, if the city council decides to move forward in this direction, you will then all vote on it. So basically, it will be a question to each and every one of you, and you'll have to reflect back on things maybe you heard today, because at the end of the day, it's your call. Mr. Huizar, did you want to say something to close? And then Mr. Hockman?
No, I just want to thank everybody for being here and appreciate the discussion. We keep learning as we have these. Thank you.
Very briefly, and I echo the same thanks. Let me leave you with a potential vision. Okay, March 3rd, 2015 is the primary election for the even council districts. So let's say, hypothetically, we did have a voter drawing for those districts. The voters who have never voted before, let's say there's a bunch of them that actually want to be in that drawing. In order to vote, they have to register. So they're going to actually you're going to see a surge of registration because they want to be in the drawing. After they actually get registered, then they have to figure out where they can vote. So all those people who have been potentially asking questions about where their voting place is, they got to get that question answered if they want to get into the drawing. Or they can do an absentee ballot, and they got to figure out that. So I'm not saying that you should do one or the other, or one before the other. You should do education and voter turnout at the same time. I don't think you necessarily have to flip it one or the other, or prioritize one or the other. If I got people who all of a sudden for the first time maybe in their life want to go ahead and register and find out where their polling place is, if for no other reason than to get into this drawing, you've already accomplished a lot. Now it's up to the people like Mr. Gonzalez and the strategists to figure out how to fill them with the education so they vote for their candidate. So March 4th, 2015, here's the vision. Instead of basically 11%, 11 to 18% average turnout, all of a sudden you read in the front page of the LA Times and every other paper, LA achieves record increase in percentage voter turnout in the 30s. And 30s is still low, by the way, but it would be almost 3 times, maybe the 40s. Let's think ambitiously. People really want that money, okay? Let's say you have $10,000 prizes, and they're willing to go register and go ahead and find out their polling place because they want a chance for a $10,000 prize. So March 4th, those are the headlines. LA leads the nation in the most innovative way to increase voter turnout in months rather than years as a pilot program. And now what happens if it doesn't work? Okay, let's just do the flip side. If it doesn't work, are we really any worse off than we are today? I expect voter turnout to be in the teens. I'd be shocked if you had a lottery and it didn't double it overnight. And so are we worse off by not trying the pilot program? I say potentially use all your other suggestions, but this is a realistic alternative as well.
Thank you, Commissioner. And if I could look to Madam Clerk, we have some instructions that you should read at this time.
I can do that. The instruction is to the CLA, the Chief Legislative Analyst, to report back by Friday, October 17th on the following. 1, to instruct the CLA to prepare a resolution to include in the city's 2015-16 state legislative program support for a sponsorship of legislation to change the state elections code, allowing candidates for municipal office and school district to be placed on the ballot before candidates for Superior Court judge. Number 2 is to instruct the CLA to prepare a resolution to include in the city's legislative program support for requesting that the LAUSD restore civics education as a separate course in the 11th or 12th grade level. And number 3 is to instruct the CLA to prepare a resolution to include in the city's legislative program support for requesting that the LAUSD collaborate with the City of Los Angeles in conducting high school civic outreach activities.
Okay, I'd like to amend item 2, where I'm trying education as a separate course in the, it should be earlier.
9th grade through 12th.
Something like that. So if we could put 9th through 12th, or you want to get them when they're a little bit younger, I think. So with that said, thank each and every one of you. You've been great hosts, neighborhood council. You've been phenomenal hosts. You came and sat with us the whole time, and we personally appreciate that. And we will, if you have any comments or suggestions, please send them in to the Rules Committee, which I chair. And this committee is adjourned. Thank you so much. Give a round of applause to our people on the panel. They didn't get paid either.